You think he's avoiding you. The slower replies, the sudden need for space, the shift in energy that makes you question everything. And your mind goes to the worst place. If he cared, he wouldn't act like this. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the very distance you're interpreting as rejection is actually protection? Not protection from you, protection from his own feelings. Because when emotions start to feel real, when attachment begins to form, when the idea of losing you becomes possible, something changes inside him. For many men, love doesn't feel soft and romantic at first. It feels risky. It feels exposing. It feels like standing without armor. And when someone isn't used to that level of emotional intensity, their first reaction isn't always to move closer. Sometimes it's to step back. Here's what most women don't realize. Men are taught to manage life by controlling it. Control their goals, control their outcomes, control their emotions. So when love shows up, real love, it disrupts that sense of control. If he starts imagining a future with you, if he feels jealous at the thought of losing you, if your opinion suddenly matters more than anyone else's, that's not casual anymore. That's investment. And investment creates vulnerability. Vulnerability is powerful, but it's also terrifying. So what does fear look like? It can look like mixed signals. It can look like being hot and cold. It can look like pulling back right after a moment of closeness. Not because the closeness was wrong, but because it was too real. This doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior. It doesn't mean you chase him harder or prove your worth. In fact, pressure makes fear worse. When someone already feels overwhelmed by emotion, adding expectations only confirms their anxiety. Instead, strength is calm. Confidence is patience. Attraction grows in emotional safety. When you respond to his distance with steadiness instead of panic, you communicate something powerful. I'm not here to trap you. I'm here because I choose you. That removes the threat. And here's the truth. A man who is scared of falling in love but still keeps showing up in small ways, still checks in, still finds excuses to see you, is fighting an internal battle. He's weighing risk against desire. Your role isn't to rescue him from that fear. It's to observe. Is he moving toward courage, even slowly, or is he consistently retreating? Because fear can be worked through. Indifference cannot. So before you assume he's avoiding you because he doesn't care, ask a different question. Is he pulling away because this suddenly matters more than he expected? Sometimes the distance you feel isn't rejection. It's the moment love starts to feel real. Fear of vulnerability often looks like disinterest, and this is where so many misunderstandings begin. When someone starts developing real feelings, they don't always lean in with confidence and clarity. For many people, especially those who have been hurt before or taught to suppress emotion, the experience of caring deeply can feel destabilizing. Instead of openly expressing that fear, they mask it. And the mask often looks like distance. When a man feels himself becoming emotionally attached, something shifts internally. He realizes that your presence now has impact. Your approval matters more. Your absence would hurt more. That awareness introduces emotional risk. An emotional risk challenges the identity many men are conditioned to maintain, the identity of being composed, independent, and unaffected. So what happens? He may slow down communication. He may become less expressive right after a moment of intimacy. He may need space after a deep conversation. To you, it can feel like he's losing interest. But in reality, he may be trying to regulate an intensity he doesn't fully understand yet. This is important. Vulnerability requires emotional safety. If someone hasn't practiced being emotionally open, their first instinct is self-protection. Self-protection doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A delayed reply, a change in tone, a slight withdrawal after things feel especially good. These behaviors aren't always about rejection. Often, they are about internal processing. Psychologically, when attachment deepens, it activates past experiences. If he has ever been disappointed, betrayed, or made to feel inadequate in love, those memories can resurface, not consciously, but emotionally. His nervous system reacts before his logic does. Pulling back can be his way of lowering emotional exposure while he regains equilibrium. This does not mean every distant behavior is rooted in fear. True disinterest exists, but the key difference lies in pattern and consistency. A man who is afraid yet invested will still find ways to stay connected. He may hesitate, but he won't disappear. He may need time, but he won't permanently detach. His actions will show internal conflict rather than indifference. Understanding this changes how you respond. When you interpret fear as rejection, you react from insecurity, you chase, over-explain, demand reassurance, or withdraw emotionally yourself. That reaction increases pressure. Pressure reinforces his belief that closeness equals loss of control. When you recognize that vulnerability can trigger temporary distance, you respond with steadiness. You maintain your standards without escalating tension. You allow space without punishing it. That calm presence communicates safety. Emotional maturity is the ability to tolerate uncertainty without immediately assuming the worst. When you can do that, you create an environment where vulnerability becomes less threatening. And ironically, the less you panic at signs of fear, the safer he feels leaning in again. So before labeling distance as disinterest, observe carefully. Does he still invest effort? Does he re-engage after space? Does he show subtle signs of care even when he's quiet? Fear retreats temporarily. Disinterest withdraws permanently. Recognizing the difference is power. When a man feels strong emotions, his instinct may be to regain control. This isn't because he doesn't value connection. It's because intense feelings can feel destabilizing, especially if he's used to operating from logic, independence, and self-reliance. From a young age, many men are conditioned to believe that strength equals composure. They're rewarded for being decisive, solution-oriented, and emotionally contained. So when love enters the picture, real attachment, not casual attraction, it can feel like something that disrupts that internal balance. Suddenly, he's thinking about you at random moments. Your mood affects his mood. Your approval matters more than he expected. That level of emotional influence can feel like a loss of control. And when someone feels out of control, the natural response is to restore it. Regaining control can show up in subtle ways. He may slow the pace of the relationship. He might avoid defining things too quickly. He may create small amounts of space after moments of closeness. It's not necessarily manipulation. Often, it's regulation. He's trying to make sense of how deeply he feels without feeling overwhelmed by it. Strong emotions introduce uncertainty. If he starts imagining a future with you, he also has to imagine the possibility of losing you. If he lets himself fully care, he risks disappointment. Love expands possibility, but it also expands risk. For someone who is wired to minimize risk in other areas of life, that can feel uncomfortable. This is where many women misinterpret behavior. They assume that if he pulls back slightly, his feelings must be fading. But sometimes the opposite is true. The more significant you become, the more cautious he becomes. He wants to move forward, but he also wants to protect himself from emotional exposure. Control gives him psychological safety. By pacing things, by keeping parts of himself guarded, he feels less vulnerable. It allows him to stay grounded while his emotions catch up. In his mind, slowing down doesn't mean stopping. It means stabilizing. This instinct to regain control doesn't mean you should accept inconsistency or confusion indefinitely. There's a difference between someone processing strong feelings and someone avoiding responsibility. A man who is genuinely navigating deep emotion will still show intention. He will communicate, even imperfectly. He will make effort, even if cautiously. Your role in this dynamic is not to force clarity before he's ready, but also not to shrink yourself to accommodate his fear. When you remain steady, not demanding, not chasing, but also not over-investing, you send a powerful signal. Connection doesn't equal chaos. Love doesn't require surrendering identity. The more secure and self-assured you are, the less threatened he feels by his own emotions. When he sees that caring for you doesn't mean losing himself, the need to tightly control the situation begins to soften. Strong feelings can be disorienting for someone who equates stability with emotional restraint. But when those feelings are met with calm rather than pressure, they become something he can lean into instead of manage. Sometimes regaining control is just a temporary step before he feels safe enough to let go. Emotional risk can trigger distancing behavior, not because he doesn't care, but because he does. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in modern dating. We tend to believe that when someone cares deeply, they should naturally move closer, communicate more, and express their feelings openly. But emotional investment doesn't always create immediate closeness. Sometimes it creates hesitation. When feelings become real, the stakes rise. At the beginning of a connection, everything feels light. There's curiosity, attraction, excitement, but very little to lose. If it doesn't work out, life continues mostly unchanged. But the moment attachment forms, the possibility of loss becomes meaningful. Now, your presence matters. Your opinion carries weight. Your absence would leave a mark. That awareness is emotional risk. Risk activates protection mechanisms. For some men, especially those who are not deeply practiced in emotional expression, this protection shows up as distance. It may look like needing more space after intimacy. It may look like withdrawing slightly after a vulnerable conversation. It may look like becoming quieter just when things seem to be progressing beautifully. To someone on the receiving end, that shift can feel confusing or even painful. You might think, if he felt something real, he wouldn't pull away. But the intensity of emotion can feel overwhelming. When he realizes how much power you now have to hurt him, even unintentionally, his instinct may be to reduce exposure. Emotional risk challenges identity. Many men pride themselves on being steady, independent, and self-contained. Falling deeply for someone introduces unpredictability. Suddenly, decisions are no longer just about personal goals. They involve someone else's feelings, expectations, and dreams. That level of responsibility can feel heavy if he isn't fully prepared for it. In this context, becomes a coping strategy. It allows him to slow down the emotional momentum. It gives him space to process what he's feeling without fully surrendering to it. It's not always a conscious choice. Often, it's automatic, his nervous system seeking balance. It's important to differentiate between temporary distancing due to emotional processing and chronic avoidance. A man who cares but feels scared will eventually circle back. He may not articulate his fear perfectly, but he won't disappear without effort. His actions will still show underlying investment, checking in, making plans, maintaining connection in small but consistent ways. When you respond to emotional risk with panic, demanding reassurance, accusing him of not caring, or escalating the intensity, it can amplify his fear. It confirms his internal belief that closeness equals pressure. On the other hand, when you respond with calm confidence, you reduce the perceived threat. You show that connection doesn't mean entrapment. This doesn't mean tolerating neglect. It means understanding the emotional mechanics at play. Love requires courage. For some, courage builds gradually. When a man recognizes that his vulnerability is met with steadiness rather than chaos, distancing becomes less necessary. Sometimes stepping back is not about running away. It's about gathering the courage to step forward in a way that feels safe and sustainable. The way you respond to his fear determines whether he leans in or pulls away. This is where emotional intelligence becomes more powerful than emotional intensity. When someone you care about begins to distance themselves slightly, your reaction can either create safety or amplify threat. Fear in relationships is rarely announced directly. He doesn't usually say, "I'm scared of how much I feel." Instead, it shows up in behavior, delayed messages, a sudden need for space, less emotional expression after a deeply connected moment. When you interpret those shifts as rejection, your nervous system reacts. You may feel anxious, confused, or even angry. And from that emotional state, you might push for answers, demand clarity, or try to pull him closer. But pressure and fear do not coexist well. When someone already feels vulnerable, added pressure confirms their worst assumption, that emotional closeness equals loss of control. If his instinct is to protect himself from overwhelming feelings, intensity from you can feel like emotional acceleration he's not ready for. Instead of moving closer, he retreats further. Your power lies in regulation. When you respond with steadiness rather than urgency, you change the emotional environment. Calm responses communicate confidence. They say without words, I am secure enough not to panic. That security reduces the perceived risk of vulnerability. This does not mean ignoring your needs or pretending you're unaffected. It means expressing yourself without escalation. For example, instead of accusing him of pulling away, you might simply say, you enjoy spending time together and appreciate consistency. That frames connection as something positive, not something demanded. Men often lean in when they feel respected rather than cornered. Respect here means allowing emotional processing without immediately assuming the worst. It means giving space without punishing him for taking it. When he senses that he can move at a pace that feels manageable, fear loses its intensity. At the same time, your response should include quiet observation. Does he return after space? Does he continue investing in the connection? Does he show effort even if imperfectly? Your calmness should not become self-abandonment. Emotional maturity is not about tolerating confusion indefinitely. It's about responding intentionally instead of reactively. When you maintain your own life, your routines, your joy, you demonstrate that connection with you enhances life. It doesn't consume it. That perception makes intimacy feel lighter, not heavier. The less he feels that love requires surrendering his independence, the more willing he becomes to explore it. Fear shrinks in the presence of safety. Safety is built through consistency, clarity, and emotional balance. When he sees that closeness with you doesn't lead to chaos or drama, his nervous system relaxes. And relaxed people open up. Ultimately, your response sets the tone. React with anxiety and distance grows. Respond with grounded confidence, and he has room to step forward. Attraction deepens when safety replaces pressure. This is the quiet truth that transforms connections from fragile to lasting. Chemistry may spark interest, mystery may create excitement, but emotional safety is what allows love to grow roots. Pressure often comes from fear. Fear of losing momentum, fear of being replaced, fear of not being chosen. When you feel uncertainty, it's natural to want reassurance. You want clarity. You want confirmation. But when that desire turns into urgency, it can unintentionally create tension. And tension makes vulnerability harder. Emotional safety, on the other hand, lowers defenses. It tells the other person, you are free here. You are not being evaluated every second. You are not one mistake away from losing everything. That feeling of freedom allows authenticity, and authenticity strengthens attraction far more than performance ever could. When a man feels pressured to define the relationship before he's processed his emotions, to match a level of intensity he hasn't reached yet, to constantly prove his feelings, his instinct may be to create space. Not because he doesn't care, but because he associates closeness with expectation. Expectation can feel heavy. It can feel like a test he might fail. Safety feels different. Safety feels like acceptance without complacency. It feels like being wanted, not needed for survival. There is a subtle but powerful difference between I choose you and I need you to validate me. One invites closeness. The other creates responsibility that can feel overwhelming. Attraction deepens when he experiences you as grounded. When your happiness does not depend entirely on his behavior. When you enjoy his presence, but maintain your independence. That balance makes connection feel like expansion, not obligation. Safety also involves emotional predictability. If every small shift in his behavior leads to conflict or dramatic reaction, he learns that closeness equals volatility. But when you respond with measured communication and calm energy, he begins to relax. Relaxation is fertile ground for intimacy. This does not mean suppressing your needs. True safety includes honest expression. The key is tone and timing. Communicating what you value in a composed way invites dialogue. Communicating from panic invites defense. One builds partnership. The other builds walls. Over time, when pressure is removed, something powerful happens. He starts leaning in voluntarily. He opens up more because he feels safe doing so. He invests more because the relationship feels sustainable. Attraction matures from excitement into attachment. Safety doesn't eliminate desire, it strengthens it. Because when someone feels emotionally secure, they stop protecting themselves from you and start building with you. And that is when love stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like a choice. So here's the truth that ties all of this together. When he pulls back, it doesn't automatically mean he's losing interest. Sometimes it means the opposite. Sometimes it means the feelings have crossed a line from casual to meaningful. And meaning introduces risk. Fear of vulnerability can look like distance. Strong emotions can trigger a need for control. Emotional risk can create temporary space. But none of those things automatically equal indifference. The real question is not, did he step back? The real question is he still choosing to step forward, even slowly? You cannot force someone into courage. You cannot love someone out of fear by applying pressure. But you can create an environment where vulnerability feels safe instead of threatening. Your power has never been in chasing, convincing, or proving your worth. Your power is in steadiness, in self-respect, in responding instead of reacting, in allowing a man the space to face his feelings while also knowing you deserve consistency. Because here's what matters most. A man who is scared of falling in love but genuinely cares will wrestle with his fear, not run from you entirely. He may hesitate. He may move slower than you'd like. But he will not disappear without effort. And if he does disappear without effort, that isn't fear. That's clarity. The goal is not to decode every mixed signal. The goal is to observe patterns. Is he growing braver over time? Is he investing more, not less? Is the distance temporary or permanent? Love requires courage from both people. When you stay grounded in your value and refuse to let anxiety dictate your behavior, you become a safe place, not a battlefield. And in that safety, the right man doesn't feel trapped. He feels inspired to step forward.